Welcome to the deep dive. Get ready, because today we're plunging into a case that is, well, truly haunting. A mystery buried for years beneath the vast, sort of unfinished landscape of Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is the story of the West Mesa bone collector. And it all kicks off on a seemingly ordinary day with an extraordinary and really grim discovery.
That's right. February 2009. Picture this. A dog walker is out on this undeveloped land, that stretches across the city's West Mesa.
Okay.
Her dog, sniffing around, finds something unexpected. Turns out to be a human femur.
Wow.
And that single bone discovery didn't just lead to an investigation. It triggered the largest forensic dig in the entire history of the Albuquerque Police Department.
A single bone. Revealing such a horrifying secret. It's quite an intense place to start this story.
Definitely.
So our mission today, pulling from this stack of sources you've shared, articles, timelines, research, is really to unpack this mystery. We need to understand the full timeline, learn about the victims, examine the evidence they found at the burial site, look at the persons of interest authorities considered, and try to figure out why, over a decade later, this case remains agonizingly unsolved.
Exactly. And to really grasp the scale of this tragedy, we have to go back before that 2009 discovery. Back to the years when these women disappeared, one by one, actually, without any initial connection being made.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our sources paint a picture of a really terrifying period between, 2001 and 2005.
That's the time frame.
This is when the initial disappearances happened. 11 women vanished from Albuquerque.
11.
We're talking about women aged 15 to 32. And tragically, one victim. She was 4 months pregnant when she disappeared.
And what really stands out from the sources about these missing women is the victim profile is quite specific.
How so?
10 were Hispanic women, and one was a black teen runaway. Crucially, all but one were local residents and known to the city's vice detectives. Many shared significant risk factors, things like sex work, drug use. When you look at that consistent profile, it points pretty strongly towards a focused offender, right?
Yeah, someone's specifically targeting a very vulnerable group within the city.
Exactly.
Their families, obviously heartbroken, searching. They reported them missing during these years. But our sources highlight something critical here about this early stage. These disappearances were handled separately.
Right, by different police departments initially. They weren't immediately linked up.
And what does that mean for the investigation? Well, it meant that crucial witness timelines that might have existed early on, or potential connections between the victims, their last known whereabouts, that stuff could have been missed.
Or just faded before investigators realized they were dealing with, a connected series of cases. A bigger picture.
Which brings us jarringly forward to 2009. The desert, which had held these secrets for years. It finally started to give them up. And here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, deeply unsettling. That single femur found by Christine Ross and her dog in February 2009. It wasn't an isolated find, was it?
Not at all. It led to this massive, intensive forensic investigation. It lasted 4 months.
4 months?
Forensic crews were on the West Mesa nonstop from March all the way through June of 2009. They were digging across 92 acres of land. Just imagine the scale of that effort.
92 acres.
Sifting through desert soil under the New Mexico sun, looking for what they eventually found.
And what they found confirmed the absolute worst fears. Over those months, they exhumed 11 sets of human remains.
Missing women. They'd been found.
Yeah.
What's particularly fascinating and grim is the burial pattern investigators observed. The victims were found in these shallow pits.
Shallow pits.
It was clear this was a clandestine burial ground, meaning it was secret, hidden. And the way the graves were laid out, that sort of consistent nature of the burials, it strongly suggested it wasn't just some random dump site. It appeared to be a single location used repeatedly over the years, probably by the same person or people.
And there's a piece of evidence related to this site that is truly striking, something that really gives you chills when you think about it.
With that.
Our sources reveal that satellite photos taken years earlier, between 2003 and 2005, actually show tire ruts in areas of disturbed soil exactly where these graves were later discovered in 2009.
Wow. So the evidence was there, kind of from space, years before.
Exactly. That detail is incredibly significant, isn't it? It hints that the killer wasn't just dumping bodies once and leaving.
No, they were returning. returning to this isolated spot multiple times over those years.
And doing it completely undetected, even as, nearby housing developments might have been starting up around the edges of that area.
Yeah, that suggests a level of familiarity with the area, maybe, or perhaps just a chilling confidence that they could return to this hidden graveyard repeatedly without being seen.
So, with the bodies recovered, what could investigators actually learn from the physical evidence found there at the burial site itself?
Well, the cause of death for the victims was ultimately ruled homicidal violence. But, these remains had been in shallow graves in the desert for years, exposed to the elements.
Right.
The bones were quite weathered, which made it difficult to determine a precise single mechanism of death for everyone. But the sources do note that some of the remains showed signs of sharp trauma.
Okay. And our sources also highlight several, oddities and loose threads details that don't easily fit into a simple narrative and just raise more questions.
Absolutely. One major oddity is the striking lack of personal items with the bodies.
Like what?
Jewelry, cell phones, most clothing. They were largely removed before burial. Now, what does that tell us? It could suggest the killer was taking trophies, right?
Yeah.
Something personal from the victims,
Right.
or it could be a calculated attempt to, clean up the scene. Remove potential evidence that could identify the victims or provide clues about the killer.
And as you mentioned with those satellite photos, the fact that the killer returned repeatedly to these same seemingly undisturbed areas, burying the women in shallow pits, sometimes apparently in rows, it just reinforces this image of someone methodically using this site over a long period.
And again, managing to avoid detection for years. It's quite something.
Then there's that puzzling lead from 2010. Remember that?
The photographs. Yes.
The Albuquerque Police Department released 7 photographs of unidentified women. They were afraid these could be additional victims.
Right. But the strangeness here, noted in the sources, is that these were described as mystery images of unconscious women from an unspecified source.
Exactly. Unspecified. And APD has never publicly explained their provenance, like where did these photos actually come from?
Right.
And as a result, this lead really just fizzled out, in part because of this unclear chain of custody.
Which is critical in police work. Chain of custody proves who handled evidence when ensures it wasn't tampered with. Without that clear chain for these photos.
Their reliability, their usefulness as evidence was severely compromised.
Yeah. And we touch on it briefly, but the fact that one victim was pregnant, that adds another layer, doesn't it?
It does. It's a detail that could potentially suggest maybe an escalation in the offender's violence, or perhaps hint at some specific, though unknown, motive. It's hard to say.
All these details paint a picture of a killer who was deliberate, perhaps even meticulous in some ways.
But left these really puzzling clues behind.
Yeah, which naturally leads us to the crucial question. Who could be responsible? The sources mention several persons of interest authorities looked at.
Okay, let's get into that.
The person highlighted most prominently in our sources is a man named Lorenzo Montoya.
Lorenzo Montoya.
Okay, and there are several compelling reasons why he became such a significant figure in this investigation. First, he was known as a John, someone who pays for sex.
Right.
And he lived incredibly close to the burial site, just 2 miles away.
2 miles, that's very close.
Very close. And critically, the sources state that he strangled a sex worker in 2006.
He did.
Okay, here's the chilling connection. The disappearances of the West Mesa victims stopped.
Yeah.
The same year Lorenzo Montoya died.
Wait, when did he die?
He was shot and killed by that sex worker's boyfriend in 2006, the same year the disappearances stopped.
Wow. Okay, that timing is highly suggestive, isn't it?
Incredibly suggestive, yeah. But there's also what's noted in the sources as a potential major misstep related to Montoya.
What was that?
After he died in 2006, his trailer and his car were released by authorities.
They just released them back to family, or?
Yeah, released. So think about that.
Yeah.
Any potential trace evidence, DNA, fibers, anything that might have linked him to the victims of the burial site
Gone.
could have been lost forever when his property was no longer held as evidence.
That's a huge potential loss of evidence.
It is. Now, the sources also touch on alternate persons of interest who were looked at.
Okay, who else?
They mentioned Joseph Blee, a local man known as the mid-school rapist who's currently serving a long sentence, and also a photographer named Fred Reynolds.
And the connection there.
These individuals were linked mainly by their location or history in the area. But the sources are clear. Investigators lacked hard evidence directly connecting them to the West Mesa murders.
So Montoya remains the prime figure, despite the evidence issues.
It seems that way based on the timing and proximity, yes. This leads to two main kind of competing theories about who was behind these killings.
Okay.
On one hand, you have that consistent victim profile and the apparent use of a single burial site that could strongly point to a lone predator.
Right, someone acting alone, maybe like Lorenzo Montoya fits that profile potentially.
Potentially. But the sources also bring up another possibility. This one supported by an FBI memo referenced in the materials.
An FBI memo, what did it suggest?
It suggested a regional sex trafficking ring.
Ah.
This theory proposes that the women might have been moved around, perhaps taken to state fairs or truck stops, and that the West Mesa site could have been used primarily as a disposal ground by a group.
Rather than being the actual kill site for all of them.
Exactly, a different operational model altogether.
These complex possibilities, I mean, they make the investigation incredibly difficult even years later. So looking back, how did the investigators handle this case overall? What went well, and what were the challenges?
Well, the sources do credit investigators with some smart moves, especially early on during that massive 2009 dig.
Like what?
They brought in forensic anthropologists right away, used ground-penetrating radar.
Yeah.
The benefit of that, it helped them map and preserve the exact placement of the bones. That's crucial forensic detail.
They're good.
They also did something essential. They cross-referenced the Vice Unit's list of missing persons. By doing this, they were finally able to link these disappearances and build a single caseload, recognize the pattern, instead of just having 11 isolated missing persons files scattered around.
But as we've discussed, there were potential misses or at least significant hurdles that emerged along the way.
Definitely. That slow linkage of the early disappearances back in, 2003 to 2006. It meant opportunities to gather crucial witness information or follow early leads were likely lost before the cases were connected. Time is always critical.
And the loss of that evidence window at Lorenzo Montoya's property after his death in 2006, that remains a huge what if in the investigation, doesn't it? Could crucial links have been found there?
We'll just never know. And then the fizzled photo lead from 2010, where the unclear chain of custody essentially made those photos unusable.
Yeah.
That was another avenue that seemingly led to a dead end.
Frustrating. So here we are, over 15 years after the discovery on the West Mesa. What is the current status of the case?
Legally, no charges have ever been filed against anyone. But because there's no statute of limitations on homicide in New Mexico,
okay.
the case remains officially open. Investigators are still actively working it.
And they're hoping that newer forensic technologies can maybe provide the breakthrough they need.
Exactly. Our sources say that touch DNA analysis looking for those microscopic traces of skin cells left behind and genetic genealogy screens are ongoing efforts.
So they're running potential DNA profiles against those massive public and private databases, hoping for a match or maybe a familial link.
That's the hope. Trying to connect any potential unknown DNA back to someone.
And there have also been some key developments more recently, right? Particularly between 2021 and 2024.
Yes. The FBI and the city of Albuquerque jointly posted a significant reward, $100,000, for information leading to an arrest.
$100,000? That might encourage someone to come forward, even after all this time.
Money can sometimes do that, yeah. Loosen lips.
And there's been real discussion and movement around a proposed DNA testing bill specifically aimed at allowing authorities to sample DNA from deceased suspects.
Right. Think about that in the context of Lorenzo Montoya.
Exactly. If this bill passes, it could potentially allow investigators to legally test his DNA profile, assuming a sample exists somewhere.
Or can be obtained.
And compare it against any evidence found at the site or against potential hits from genetic genealogy.
It shows that investigators aren't giving up, They're exploring every avenue, including how evolving technology and potential changes in the law could finally bring some resolution to this incredibly complex and tragic case.
This deep dive really reveals the layers of this mystery. It's a lot. Multiple victims targeted over years. Puzzling evidence like those mystery photos, the lack of personal items, key suspects who are either still unidentified or, in a strange twist of fate, are deceased and can't easily be tested against the evidence.
And then add to that the competing theories. Was it a lone killer or some kind of organized crime ring?
Despite the tireless work, the ongoing forensic efforts, the reward, the sheer passage of time, the West Mesa case remains unsolved.
It does, and it leaves these profound questions just hanging there for the victims' families, and it continues to weigh heavily on the community of Albuquerque.
It really makes you pause and consider how cold cases are being pursued today compared to even just a decade ago.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the rapid advancements in genetic genealogy. That technology has cracked open so many cold cases recently.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And the potential impact of laws, like the one being proposed in New Mexico, allowing DNA testing of deceased persons.
Right. Could the key to finally unlocking this mystery lie buried not just out in the desert soil of the West Mesa, but potentially within the vast databases of DNA profiles?
Possibly pointing back to a suspect who died years before anyone even knew those graves were there.
Yeah, that's something to truly mull over after diving into this one.